All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining the webinar, Making Sense of Dyscalculia. I'm Janine Cyrus. I'm the Director of Outreach and Literacy Services at Oakwood School. We're a private elementary and middle school that's in the DC metro area, and we serve students with language-based learning differences. Through outreach and literacy services, we offer screenings, assessments, resources for families and in the members of the community, as well as professional development for educators locally and internationally. This session, like I mentioned a moment ago, is being recorded. So we'll be sending this out to everybody who registered. My hope is we'll be getting this out to you early next week. Today, we are excited to welcome Dr. Honora Wall. Honora is a board member for both the Learning Disabilities Association of America and LDA Iowa, we met in Florida at the LDA conference. It was wonderful meeting you. And she's a long-term member of the Association of Teacher Educators. She's the founder of EduCalc Learning and the executive director of the Dyscalculia Training and Research Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to raising awareness and improving the lives of those with dyscalculia. With over 20 years of experience in education, Honora holds an MA in Applied Learning and Instruction from the University of Central Florida and an educational doctorate in Curriculum and Instruction from Concordia University in Chicago. She's also the author of 6 books, which are available on Amazon and in bookstores. Honora's passion is empowering others through math mastery. Say that 10 times real fast. She believes that when individuals overcome math struggles and begin to see themselves as mathematically competent, their lives change. And that transformation is at the heart of her work. So thank you, Dr. Wall, for joining us. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm really excited to talk with you today about dyscalculia. Some people say dyscalculia, some people say dyscala. I don't care how you say it as long as we are talking about it. And we are going to take a bird's eye view today. We're going to paint with a broad brush because we have limited time and a lot of people. This is how you can find me. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide because it'll come back up again at the end. I'm on YouTube. I'm in a lot of socials. You can find me if you need more information. I'll just point out that my podcast and my Facebook teacher group, those are both free and have a lot of free information if you want to get farther along than what we're able to do today. So what are we doing today? There are 4 things that I want to make sure we hit in this hour. I want to explain neurodivergent conditions because there's no way to talk about dyscalculia without talking about the rest of the family of neurodivergent conditions. And then we're going to really dive into what is special and unique about that math learning disability and why it's different than some of the things you've probably heard of before. Then we're going to talk about those things you've heard of before, low numeracy, a weak math foundation, and also things like anxiety that really impact math performance for students. And finally, we are going to get specific about the interventions and accommodations that can really help students get to mastery quickly. So these are the goals. This is what we're going to try to get to. I was able to see a lot of the questions that people sent in, and I believe that our hour is going to answer most of those, and we'll try to do some Q&A at the end. If you have a specific question, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and Janine will be keeping an eye on that for me, so thank you for that. And I'll get as much information to you as I can. I love talking to people about dyscalculia. I want to start with that overview of those neurodivergence conditions that we talk about. So neurodiversity just means the understanding that we're all individual humans and we all have brains that think in different ways. Neurodivergent means something a little different than the typical development we expect to see. And that is a broad umbrella. It includes autism, ADHD, the specific learning disorders, and Tourette's syndrome. So you can see a lot of overlap between these conditions, and sometimes you'll get a diagnosis of more than one. or you might only have one. Diagnosis is a whole big issue that we'll try to get to, but that's a tough conversation to have. There's a lot going on in diagnosing specific learning disorders, especially the one for math. The big takeaway that I want you to know, especially for the educators in the group, and maybe after this slide, we can take a look at that poll and kind of see how the group is lining up. But the big thing I want you to know is that right now, our K through 16, so including higher ed, we're not really supporting these students very well. And there's a ton of growth hiding in this population. If you can support students with dyscalculia the right way, they will be doing grade level work with mastery before you know it. And it's a very quick turnaround. And then the academic growth is beautiful to watch. Why are we having such a hard time with this? Well, partly it's because a lot of times students who have some sort of neurodivergence are put into a traditional special ed track or services. And these come from a different theoretical lens in the world of research, which will not go down that boring rabbit hole today. Don't worry. But a lot of special education comes from behaviorism, and we do a lot of looking at tasks and behaviors and activities. That's not the issue for students who have dyscalculia. So we're doing great work for a different issue, and that's why it's not really helping. So you're seeing students who are still struggling, even though you're doing great work. For our general education teachers, this can be very frustrating because you know you're doing a good job, you know you're supporting your students, and we're not seeing that needle move the way we want it to. Even more aggravating for our students who know that they are capable and they can't quite explain the difficulties they're having so that we know how to help them. These students tend to have average to above average intelligence, and they should be properly placed in a gen ed classroom if we can get the support the right way. So Janine, do we have results from that poll? Do we know?
Yes, I'm going to pull it up right now.
Great.
Um, for number one, what is your role as related to dyscalculia? We've got 51% are teachers, 20% identified as math specialists, 11% identified as administrators, 23% said that they have a parent or family member of someone with dyscalculia, and then 17% said, excuse me, they are professionals in the field of education. Um, and then on the other question about how familiar are you with dyscalculia, I would say 54% say they gave themselves a 3 right in the middle, like I could explain it. And then just like, you know, the bar, right? It goes down from
Mhm.
there. Bell curve, I should say, it goes down from there.
Okay, great. Um, so then I will try to tailor a lot of this for that classroom experience, but I won't leave out parents, family, and friends, and people who might have dyscalculia. Hopefully, everyone feels welcome in the conversation. Um, You're going to see a lot of similar threads through all these different types of neurodivergence. And probably the biggest one I see is that time blindness, which is a big part of ADD and ADHD, but also a big part of dyscalculia. And some of that can be telling time. Certainly, telling time for people with dyscalculia can be a nightmare, but also understanding we're going to lunch in 20 minutes. We need to leave the house in 5 minutes. I need to be at work at 3 o'clock. What does that mean? And that's very difficult, that elapsed time and understanding how time works. So we can see that quite a bit, mostly in dyscalculia, also in some other issues. People who are neurodivergent do not have a low IQ. So they're very smart and capable, and that can lead to a lot of frustration. And sometimes we see acting out in the classroom from that frustration. And when we fix the accommodations and the interventions, we can reduce a lot of that. You want to have more discussions. You want to have a conversation more than just giving text or letting students try to teach themselves. And these students will have a right answer, but they have a very interesting way of thinking. So it might not be the answer that matches your learning objective. So they're explaining things in a different way than what you are hoping to get for an answer. So be aware of that. And if that happens too frequently, then these students can shut down and stop engaging in class. So we want to make sure to find what they're saying that's technically correct, although not quite what we're looking for, and honor that and bring them into the conversation. And we can see some rigid linear thinking that can make the transition into algebraic thinking a little harder. And again, we're just going to talk about it more, and that's going to really help. So that was very brief, I know, but I want to get right into the meat of dyscalculia. The reason why I need you to understand that it's a neurodivergence issue is that it has nothing to do with your teaching method. It has nothing to do with the environment they grew up in. It has nothing to do with their behavior or attitude. It's a different way of thinking. We can do a lot of great things as educators. We cannot change the brain structure of our students. We can support their learning, but we are not trying to cure or fix or move students past dyscalculia. This is a way of thinking that lasts throughout the lifespan. So adults with dyscalculia show a lot of the same issues and have a lot of the same frustrations as younger students. It can be genetic. It does not have to be genetic. And it could be called all sorts of different things. It could be labeled dyscalculia, math disability, specific learning disability in math, or it might not be tagged at all. So that can be a really frustrating thing because how do we help if we don't really know exactly what the issue is? So here's what's going on in the brain of a person who has dyscalculia. It really impacts that parietal lobe, which is right up here in the brain. We're not going to get into fMRIs today, but if you look at some fMRIs, when students have dyslexia, we see fewer areas of the brain on the sides light up during reading activities. And when students have dyscalculia, we can see fewer areas of that parietal lobe light up. That's where we store math information. And for these students, those neurological connections are almost like a gossamer web. So they get lost over time and they're not as strong as we see in students who don't have dyscalculia. We want to strengthen that and we want to do activities that don't rely only on that parietal lobe. We're not trying to memorize. We're trying to increase retaining math knowledge in other ways. Accommodations are the best way to help these students, and they're going to be required throughout their time in school. That's a big difference between this and low numeracy. Students with low numeracy can have interventions and short-term accommodations and move on. Students with dyscalculia keep those accommodations. The same way you're going to let a student wear their prescription glasses. The same way you're going to let a type 1 diabetic have access to their insulin pump. We're not going to change vision or diabetes. And we're not going to change dyscalculia. We're going to support it so that it does not get in the way and it doesn't become a barrier in class. One thing that's really consistent for people with dyscalculia is what I like to call the dyscalculia trifecta: time, money, and place value. They just don't ever make any sense. And a lot of that can come back to the place value piece. If you think about the ways we teach time and money, we're constantly changing the base that we're using. It could be a quarter or a dime or bills. It could be 7 days, 31 days, 6 months, 12 months. People with dyscalculia wish we would pick a lane and stick with it, which of course we can't because we're using different value systems throughout those. So that makes second, third, and fourth grade exceptionally difficult. If we can help students hang on during those tough elementary years, upper level math is actually much easier for these students. You're going to find that a lot of the basic facts are forgotten and the steps and procedures don't stick very well. So longer problems are going to need a little more support, usually in the form of memory triggers. You don't have to reteach all the time. But you do want to start a lesson by reminding students what we're doing and how we're doing it and what tools we need to get that job done. Might be a number line, 1 to 100s chart, multiplication list, or a calculator. Or it might be notes or worked examples to trigger that memory. Another thing you're going to find is that for students with dyscalculia, the typical interventions you're doing are not really working. And that's an indicator that we have a bigger issue other than just low numeracy or a weak math foundation. That elementary piece is the hardest part. I work with mostly middle school, high school, and college age students who have dyscalculia. And here's where the disconnect is. If you think about what we're teaching in second, third, fourth grade, we want students to add 4 digits and 3 digits. We want to carry, we want to subtract with regrouping, we want to multiply 4 decimals by 3 digit decimals. And we have all these great algorithms. And I know that's a dirty word right now, but there's nothing wrong with knowing how to do something and doing it right. So I don't mind algorithms. But when we get into upper level math, I teach Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, calculus. We're not doing any of that. Our division ends up being 12 and 6. We have much more manageable numbers. So a lot of what we want for that foundation is not necessarily a tool we need later on. The problem for these students is there's been such a barrier for so long that they are kept out of upper level math classes because of their grades or their past performance or their beliefs about themselves as math students. So I really want you to plug in some memory triggers at the beginning of a lesson, the beginning of a class, before you hand out that test, and get everyone on board so the students can find the information and remember what's expected of them in the class. Very direct, very explicit instruction. This is not a group that does very well if you throw them into project-based learning first. If you will be explicit and show them exactly what to do and how to do it, get them some mastery, now they will explore as much as you want. Students with dyscalculia, in my extensive experience, are the hardest working students I have ever encountered. They're already doing hours of homework every night. They're doing years of working with flashcards. It's just not helping them to make a difference the way we want to see that difference in a traditional classroom. Even when they're struggling and it's not helping, they're putting in the time, but it's just not getting them anywhere. So if we can help them get that mastery, they will continue to be the hardest working students in your class because they're so excited to show you what they can do. And they should be doing grade level work, and they're very capable of doing it. Here's what it looks like if I were to give an analogy of that parietal lobe. If I'm looking at this colander full of spaghetti and I'm pouring in math facts like water, it's just going to go out those holes. Now, certainly I can do other activities that's going to put some more spaghetti in there to hold a little more of the water, but I'm still going to have some loss. And I want you to understand that that has nothing to do with you as a parent, as a teacher, or as a student. It's just that that parietal lobe is losing some of that information over time. This is another one of my most favorite examples. Here are two kitchen drawers. And these are going to represent those facts, those steps, the procedures, the formulas. Which one is perimeter? Which one is area? Which one is volume? What are you supposed to do with the cylinder? All of that information is here in both of these drawers. Which drawer would you rather get your information from? Because I can certainly find a paper clip like that in one of these drawers. And in the other one, I need a lot of extended time. I know it's in there. You know it's in there. Give me a minute because I'm going to have to move all this other stuff out of the way and figure out what you meant when you said paperclip and find it in here. So we can put the information in, but these students are having a harder time getting it back out. So when I ask you to use a number line, 1 to 100s chart, calculator, worked examples, references, notes during assessments, that is like putting those organizational bins in for these students. It simply helps them find the information. They still have to apply it. They still have to use it to problem solve, but we're helping them get it out of that junk drawer. So here are some of the specifics. I already talked about number one. I really want you doing that with your students, and then you can email me and let me know how it goes. I'd love to get your on the ground, but I can tell you it's going to help. And I want you to require students to check their work immediately using the tools listed in number one. So I don't want you to say, what is 6 times 7? I want you to say, Janine, grab that multiplication list and find 6 times 7 and tell me what it says. Janine, grab your calculator, put in -2 minus 5. Tell me what it says. Now, I'm doing a couple of different things with just changing up this question. First of all, the only exposure is the right answer, so it's the only thing that can be coded. That's very strong. If you look into neuroscience, there's a lot of research behind that. The second thing is, now I know whether the student is using the tool properly, especially that calculator, especially with integers. I have immediate information. Do they understand how to use this tool? And I can fix it for them right there. And now they know exactly what to do in the future. The third thing I'm doing is explaining how to use that tool for everyone else in the room. I have not put one person on the spot and made them feel exposed or embarrassed or nervous. I gave them a task that can be completed. Remembering a basic fact can be very hard. If I say, Janine, open your math notebook and find the formula for area. What did we write down? What do you have in your notebook? Well, first of all, now I know whether or not she did it. Now I don't have to collect math notebooks to grade them because I have that information. I can already use that. I have an opportunity, if she does not have that formula, to make sure that she's got it. And I've modeled using tools properly without making anyone feel embarrassed for having their accommodations. Janine, did you have a question to hop in with? I noticed you went off mute.
Yeah, I had one of the things I wanted to point out is you had mentioned multiplication lists, which is different than a
Hmm.
multiplication chart. And I remember you
Yes.
telling me about this, and I thought maybe this could be a good time for you to mention that to everybody.
Yes. And I think I have that in here. Let me go ahead a slide
Okay.
and see. Maybe I don't. We'll see if I do.
Okay.
Um, as I'm going through, and I'm kind of watching the time. I know I'm talking very quickly, so I apologize. Just a lot of information. I know that most of us are using that multiplication chart in the cute little rectangle. It's very easy to print in a planner, so it's ended up in a lot of our materials. That works great if you already have very strong visual spatial skills, if you already understand the relationship between multiplying and dividing, and it works very well if you can go inside and outside of a box without losing your place. That's not very true for our students with dyscalculia. So I want you to go with that old-fashioned times tables list. Now, we're not calling them times tables anymore. That was back in my day. Multiplication list is what's more accurate now. But I want you using that because now students can see all of those facts together. Their peripheral vision is picking up more of the numbers. They're seeing the pattern involved in multiplication. They're also using one tool to multiply, to divide, to find least common multiple, greatest common factor. You can circle anything that's squared in there. You can find factors and list them. You can write sets of factors. We can use it for so many different things. And the more we use one tool, the more familiar and comfortable we get with it. Now we're increasing speed without increasing frustration. And if I have two students looking at their multiplication list and they're trying to find 12, and one student says, well, it's 3 times 4. And another student says, no, it's 4 times 3. Well, now I can have a discussion about the commutative property of multiplication. So it lends itself to so many different conversations in one tool. And it increases everything on this slide here. It increases precision, prediction, and it meets rigor. Precision, I think I've explained. Prediction is really important for the human brain. We like to predict what we think is going to happen, and then we want immediate confirmation. When we know we're right, we strengthen those neurological connections. And when we know we're wrong, we weaken them. And when we don't know anything because we did not get immediate feedback, the brain doesn't know what to do with that information. So using a tool like this can really help strengthen that web of connections and get those neurons and dendrites really hooked in together. And I just want to remind us as math teachers, this idea of rigor. And that's in a lot of the things that we buy in our curriculum and our programs. It's so rigorous, and that's so great. Remember that rigor is not defined by us, and it's not necessarily defined by the math topic. It's defined by the end user. So what might seem very simple and not rigorous to someone who's been teaching math for 20 years seems completely brand new and shocking to someone who is seeing it for the first time or the third time and they're still not getting it. So keep that in mind when you look at rigor. Rigor is being thorough and exhaustive and accurate. That does not mean that it's defined by the topic. And I think I just said everything on this slide. So I'm going to leave it in here. If you're looking at the recording later, you'll have more time to read about this, but I'm going to keep moving so I don't spend too much time on repeating myself. There's a lot of research behind everything that I'm saying today, and I have some references on the end slides. And if you go to the website, I put up a lot of research articles there too. I'm going to mention some of the leading researchers. I want you looking up on your own. But while we need more research, and the number of articles published on dyslexia compared to those published on dyscalculia is about 10 to 1 right now. So we really need to catch up in the research, but we do have good research out there. And we know that memory and attention are big problems. And we know that we're going to see finger counting and those immature counting methods much longer than we would expect with a typically developing student. Let that happen. When we count on our fingers or we're using manipulatives, that tactile experience activates different parts of the brain as well. So we can really strengthen a lot of different areas of the brain. Okay, here's some more specific information I want you to do right now, and let me know how it goes. This can be a real game changer for struggling students. I want you to immediately find something they're doing right. I don't care what it is. If it's that they wrote down the formula correctly, they wrote down the problem correctly, they used their tool that is appropriate for the task, even if they didn't get the right answer, you find something that you can say, yes, this is right. Keep doing that because they need to know what to keep and what to get rid of. And they need to hear you say, yes, you did that right. Students who are struggling, especially with dyscalculia, never hear that. This is an easy way to change their experience and engage them more and let them know you're on their side and you're paying attention and you're seeing what they can do. Once you told them what to keep, then you can tell them what to change. You did a really good job getting your notes together. That is the right notes for this lesson. But I want to talk about how you put those numbers into the formula. Let's just look at that a little bit. Let's look at these letters in the formula and see what they mean again. Let's talk about PEMDAS. That's the part that I want you to do differently. Now they know exactly what to keep and exactly what to change. And then you're going to do a lot of scaffolding. And scaffolding is an incredibly effective teaching method. And it can be misused. So I want to talk a little bit about scaffolding. So when I'm scaffolding a lesson with a student, I'm going to start out very directly and explicitly telling them what I need them to do, modeling what I need them to do, and writing down every step of what I'm doing. I'm not going to assume they understand, oh, we're dividing at this part, so I don't have to write that down. No, no, no. Write down the division. Make sure they're seeing everything. Now we're going to do another problem, and I'm going to make sure they see it again. And I'm going to say, do you want to try this one? Or do you want to talk about it first? Do you want to get started? And I'll jump in if you have a question. And now I'm letting them have a little control over that. And then the other thing I'm going to do is take long pauses. I'm going to say, I really like this formula for this work. I'm going to write this down, the numbers in the formula. Let's see, I'm going to have to do that PEMDAS first. I'm going to have to square this radius. Now the radius is 4. So if I'm going to square that, and now at this point, if the student is ready, they are talking over you. It's 4 times 4, and they're putting it in the calculator. They're looking up. They're going to say it's 16. Now, do I multiply by this? I don't remember this part. But they're going to pull away from you because they want to move through the lesson. If they know what to do, they're going to take the reins. So use those pauses. They're very effective. And you can really take the student and let them have that mastery. But you will find, oh, here's my multiplication list. So much later than I thought it was. You can really find that the students will pull away from you and tell you what comes next because they want to move it along. And if they're not able to tell you, that gives you a lot of information too. So this is the list I'm talking about. You can use this for everything from the beginning of multiplication through factoring. Imagine if you were teaching a student who didn't have their basic facts how to factor. So I'm talking to my high school math teachers now. If they can look up factors here and then decide how to combine them through adding or subtracting to get that middle term, now they have to focus on the problem solving. They have to think about what factoring a quadratic means, but they're not held up staring at a 42 trying to figure out how to multiply to 42. We're using this tool because they're not using a tool mentally on their own. And so this is another example of how I want you just changing the questions you're asking. If you want better answers, ask better questions. It's really intimidating for a student when you look at them in a classroom or over the dinner table or in an interventionist setting, and you say, come on, you know what this is. What is this times this? Now we're really getting their defenses up. We're seeing a lot of pushback. They're shut down. Even if they did know, they're not going to find it now. So just change your wording. And for some teachers, change your tone. And you're going to see a lot more engagement and get to mastery faster. The sooner you can get to mastery, the sooner you can extend the lesson and enrich the concept that you're talking about. Try these, email me, let me know how they go. It's a great tool. Janine, is there anything I should definitely answer before I talk about when it's not dyscalculia?
There is one question that I wanted to bring up, and the other ones I think we can hold off just to keep with the flow of the webinar. And the question was, should you do the same with the addition facts instead of a hundreds board, just like we spoke about with the multiplication list?
You can, absolutely. It's a little harder um, because there can be so many, addition and subtraction facts. So that one, we don't have a beautiful list the way we have that multiplication list. That's an easier one to find and print out. And I'd like to be aware of how much more work we're putting on teachers. We're already overworked and overwhelmed, and I don't want you having to do a lot extra if we can help it. Um, but you can, and if you can take a look at, all right, what are we going to be adding today? And if we're using place value in that algorithm and breaking down longer addition and subtraction problems, then you can get through quite a bit of it with a 1 to 100s chart. Um, or making a list of facts. And that could be something you have the students do. They're making posters about that, and then you display the posters up on the room, or they're making their own small list. If they have dysgraphia, please also give them your clean copy. Give them the practice time of writing it down, but don't expect a student who struggles with handwriting to only have that as their resource. So engage them in the activity, but give them a better clean copy for their work. And I'm glad that that question came up because if you think about literacy and the exposure we have to words, you can look literally anywhere around your house, your classroom, your office building, anywhere you are, and see something printed. So we have a lot of exposure to letters. We have a lot of exposure to letter combinations and to different words, and we see that all the time. Our peripheral vision picks it up, whether or not we're reading it directly. And then in our classrooms, we have all sorts of great posters to support literacy. But we usually don't also put up really nice posters about numeracy. That could be something very impactful for you to put into your classroom. And it could be a nice clean copy that you find, or even better, something the students make on their own and you're displaying their work. Students who struggle, especially if they have dyscalculia, their work does not get displayed. They know they're not doing enough to be up on the wall. If you have an activity like, okay, we're going to make some of our basic addition facts and subtraction facts. I'm going to give all of you a set. You're going to make a nice poster of it, and everyone's poster gets up on the wall. Now they feel engaged and part of the conversation. And also, when they're daydreaming or looking around, or the ADHD is pulling their focus somewhere else, what they're looking at is numeracy and number combinations. So we have a lot more exposure. So that was a great question. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to what happens when it's not dyscalculia. We know that dyscalculia happens to about 10% of any given population. That's true in research studies around the world. Everyone's kind of landing there. Of course, there's a range when you start looking at individual studies, but our our basic understanding is about 10% of any group. So that's very large. It's about 5 million K-12 students in the United States, not even counting our college or adult population. But in any given school or classroom, this can be a very small number. You're going to have a very large number of students who have low numeracy, a weak math foundation, or some other issue that's impacting their math achievement. So what do we see in low numeracy that makes it different? You will still have some difficulty with those computations or reading graphs. Comparing and estimating can be a problem with both groups. And for some reason, understanding percentages comes up as a low numeracy problem all the time across the board. There's a lot of people who have terrible numeracy skills. And in adulthood, this leads to some very serious issues, including obesity and including lifetime earnings and including your career choices. So, not fixing our math problem in the K-12 system leads to a lot of long-term problems for adults. And this is a big thing that we really need to address. It's an economic issue, it's a self-esteem issue, and it's functioning in the world issue. So we definitely want to help students with low numeracy as much as possible. Now, this one does usually come from a problem with instruction. And I'm a big fan of teachers, but we all know some teachers need a little more help in how they teach math. We also have students who move a lot or there's a lot going on at home, and that trauma gets in the way of them really being able to focus in class and get a strong lesson and understand it. Maybe they didn't have a lot of time where they had practice, and so they didn't build up those skills. So there are a lot of reasons why a student can have low numeracy, and they may or may not get sent into special education services. They might just be performing very poorly in math class. And we can see these things running through all of our other issues. So then what do you do about it? Let me go back to that before I talk about anxiety. What you're going to see when students have low numeracy or weak foundation, they typically respond very well to interventions. So you can play some numeracy games, work with flashcards, you can have some extra practice, a few interventions, some accommodations, and they can increase their skills and move on. Students with dyscalculia are not the same way. I've been wearing readers for a long time now, and I don't see me giving up the readers anytime soon because wearing these glasses does not change my vision. I'm always going to need the glasses. So that's a big difference in the approach. Low numeracy, more interventions and expect them to move on away from them. Dyscalculia, more accommodations and expect to leave those in place for a longer amount of time. We have to talk about anxiety, first of all, because rates of anxiety and depression are growing so fast. So we know this is a huge problem that we have got to help our students with. And anxiety can be something just related to math or related to test taking or related to a specific topic. And it can be short term. This is not a generalized anxiety disorder. This is just some typical anxiety. I really wish we had different names for these things. But the important information for us as teachers is that whether it's anxiety or a generalized anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder, you're going to have a lot of physical symptoms like the ones that I've listed here. And you can see this anxiety in your high performing students as well. No learning disabilities, no low numeracy, but they can still panic in a test taking situation, and that can really impact their performance. The issue with anxiety and depressive disorders is that you're so full of cortisol and adrenaline and some other really nasty chemicals that are not good for us in high quantities that they block physically and chemically, excuse me, the information moving from short to long-term memory and coming back out for recall. So there are physical problems that we see there. Sorry, I'm going to have to hold that muted. I'm so sorry. Ugh, a lot of talking today. So our issues to address anxiety. We don't need those interventions and accommodations. We want that extended time so students can relax, so they can finish their assessments, see if they want to be somewhere private so they don't feel so exposed. That might make them feel more exposed, so you want to get to know your student and see what's best for them. Please don't call out on them. Don't make them feel on the spot. Anxiety creates a fight, flight, or freeze response, which is part of what generates those chemicals that we really don't want and those hormones coming out. And they're very damaging for students who are trying to learn. They're also going to be absent quite a lot because of their physical condition relating to these disorders, and that means they're missing lessons. So you can use our same memory triggers with this group to help them move through their anxiety and help them during assessments. It's an easy fix for this population of students. I want to make it clear that a generalized anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder, those are more severe medical issues. And these are two things that are driving a lot of students out of brick and mortar schools and into homeschool situations. So this is a growing population that we really should be figuring out how to address. These are chronic conditions, and they are related to body chemistry and sometimes genetics, sometimes PTSD, but not always environmental in the way low numeracy or a typical anxiety might be. And with a generalized anxiety disorder, you'll see this with the capital GAD on a diagnosis. This one is interesting. Every single thought, no matter what it is, and every single experience, no matter what it is, positive, negative, or neutral, can trigger that response and send a student into a panic. You can be a great teacher, having a great classroom, doing everything in a very smooth, calm manner, and your student can still have an anxiety response. Whether or not you see it, it can still be internal, and that can be blocking a lot of their information. So they're not creating those strong memories or recalling it when they need to. I think this is a growing area that you're going to see a lot more people talk about. Okay, we've talked about a lot of these interventions, accommodations, and diagnosis, but I want to make sure we hit the key points and then we'll get into some Q&A. I want you to remember that when we talk about students who have neurodivergence, this happens everywhere. It would be great to have a conversation about dyscalculia with your science teachers especially when we get into chemistry and physics, because there's so much math involved. It's also a good conversation to have with your social studies teachers because it impacts building, reading, and understanding timelines. So when we write IEPs and 504s, if you're doing those in your schools or you're doing an RTI or MTSS, whatever you happen to call it, we want those accommodations everywhere because our students are taking their learning disability with them everywhere they go all day. So extend those accommodations and talk to your colleagues in other content areas. And grade level work is always appropriate for neurodivergent students, high functioning autism, ADD, ADHD, any of the specific learning disorders. They can and should be doing grade level work. They're going to need those memory triggers, and I highly encourage you to take some of your verbal assessments and put them in the grade book. A lot of times, these students will be able to explain to you what to do, what the steps are, how they solved a problem, better than they can write it out. That's just a presentation issue. But if you only put in the grade book that traditional paper and pencil test or the computer-based test, then that's a barrier in the system that stops students from taking grade level classes. So put more things in the grade book. Use those alternative assessments and that universal design for learning as a grading tool, not just as an experience. I have students tell me all the time some very terrible things they hear from their teachers. So again, let's keep it positive and let's support students and remember our social emotional training strategies. And don't be afraid to let people know, hey, it sounds like you might have a learning disability, and that's fine. It's not a big deal. We're just going to support it. People who have dyscalculia say they feel much better when they know that there is something they can look up, they can understand, that they can identify. Really quickly, the difference between a learning disorder or disability is really who's doing the diagnosis. A disorder comes from a trained professional who's doing an evaluation, and just calling it a disability, that's more of a legal term, whether or not you have an evaluation. Whether or not you get an evaluation is a can of worms that is different in every single state. So a lot of that depends on where you live. If you can get a neuropsych eval, they're great because that diagnosis includes a lot of other information that can be very beneficial in the classroom. You want to look for working memory, visual, spatial, and processing speed scores. If those are average to above average, a student's going to respond very well to their accommodations. If they are low average to below average, we're going to need some extra support in there. And having the diagnosis, some parents don't want to do it. Some schools don't want to do it. It's a big conversation. They're expensive. There's usually a wait list, so they can be hard to get. But without it, students don't get the services that they need. And that is a tragedy that we want to avoid. I think I said all of this, so I'm going to move past this slide, but I'll talk about it if we need to in the Q&A. If you are looking at those evaluations and you're not someone who's read up a whole bunch on statistics and you don't want to be, not a problem. Here's what you want to look for. Anything from the 30th to 60th percentile, it'll be called NPR on those evaluations. That's fine. That is great. That's where we would love to see people. Most researchers will include 25th percentile and below as a diagnosis for dyscalculia. Some researchers and myself, I like to go with 30th percentile because the 5-degree difference could come down to a good or a bad guess on some of those questions. So I want you to capture that bottom 30th percentile and not be so rigid with the 25th. If you don't have that at all, and you're just looking at students and your direct work with them, short term, you're going to see that they're probably stopping handing in homework because they don't know what to do with it. They're stopping, that engagement drops off every year. And you might find students who are engaged on Monday and know what's going on, and they're doing pretty well on Tuesday, Wednesday. they kind of get it and they did okay with the homework and classwork. But then you get to that quiz on Friday, they look like a deer in the headlights. They have never seen this information before. That's a really strong indicator of dyscalculia. Longer term, in higher grade levels, we're seeing these problems continue even though we've tried different interventions and we're not seeing a real change. We can see this a lot in their state testing scores and in their quizzes and tests in the classroom. So those are some ways for you to know I need to step in and help. And remember, teachers, we go in our room and we close the door, and a lot of times we do what we want. You don't have to wait for someone to tell you to give a student interventions and accommodations. You can help your students right now very easily in an informal way. And then you're gathering data and being a scientist yourself and seeing how much of a change that makes for them. Okay. And good. I still have some time for some Q&A, and hopefully we have some things in the chat because I'd like to know what worked for you in this and what questions you still might have. I also want you to come find me either in the podcast or I put up a lot of reels on social with some other information. It could be topic or classroom specific or summarizing research articles that are out there. And I really appreciate that you came today and you're having this conversation about dyscalculia. It's exceptionally important. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Everything was just so informative. I'm going to be listening to this recording again. It was just covering so much and it's all really important. There are a few questions, and this is what I think I'm going to do. These questions are great, and some of them I think you could probably do another hour presentation just to answer one of the questions. So I'm going to choose a few, and I think if you're still here and you posted the question and we don't get to it, might I suggest you go ahead and post your email address um, where you put the Q&A, and then that way Dr. Wall can get back to you with some information to answer your question. Um, Let me see here. This first one, actually, this one here was already answered. This one here, is there a point to teaching students with dyscalculia long division?
I don't mind teaching that at all because, again, there's nothing wrong with an algorithm. You know what you're supposed to do and what the steps are. Is there a difference between having a student solve 127 divided by 4 versus having them solve 9,876 201 divided by 4? So I think we just want to take a look at this is my own personal um, belief. I think a lot of times we treat math class like a hot dog eating contest. We just want to shove so many problems at these students and make them so long, and because we think it meets rigor. What we're actually teaching, the objective of long division, is to understand how to take a set of numbers and break them into smaller groups and see if we can chip away through division and then find out, are we going to have anything left over or are we not? And that idea of do I have anything left over or not becomes very important in algebra and in graphing and in calculus. So absolutely, let's talk about long division and let's talk about the difference between a remainder or not a remainder. But I might say if my student has dyscalculia, then I'm going to use more manageable numbers. I'm not going to have quite so many in my string, and I might have fewer uh, of those questions on a test simply for the time. It's going to take them longer to do the work. They're still going to have to do the work and they're going to be mentally exhausted. So
Mhm,
that's why I want to have fewer. It's not a modification. I'm
mhm.
not modifying the curriculum. I am simply respecting their time.
And that taxing on their working memory when you're doing something that's that long.
Yes.
Another question here says, I have several students who have benefited from addition and multiplication lists. I find they also struggle with symbols. So I use
Yep.
colors for addition and a different color for subtraction. Are there any other ideas about symbol sense development?
Yes. And that can come through a developmental issue, or it can be a focus issue, or it can just be a paying attention to detail issue. So I would put in more games where, you have to, you're completing puzzles in class, or you put seven items on a desk and they can look at them for 30 seconds and then you cover it and take one out and they have to see what was changed. Because now you're making them practice focus and attention to detail in different ways and strengthening that and they can apply it. Another metacognition I like to do, especially for an assessment, is training students that before you do anything, you put your name and then you put your hands here and you go, okay, let me look at this. Where are all the addition problems? I'm going to put an A next to all of those. Where are all the subtraction problems? I'm going to put an S. And once you get into algebraic concepts, that minus sign in between the fractions, danger, danger, Will Robinson. Put an asterisk and a circle around those questions. So the student has really marked up and they've made a map and they've done that forward planning about how to get through the assessment. And they've looked only at those operation symbols before they get so consumed with the numbers.
Mhm. That's great. Do you have any recommended visuals to help with solving word problems? I'd like to avoid looking for just keywords.
Yeah, the keywords are great, but the problem that I see a lot of times with word problems is the people who wrote them, I'm not sure they've ever talked to another human, and I don't believe they've ever talked to a child who is writing these math word problems that we're using. They can just be so ridiculous sometimes. I would say in that sense, I want you to really get in with your students and be part of their team and acknowledge this word problem looks really confusing. Let's pull it apart together through a class discussion. And what are they asking? What are we doing here? How do we know? And when you're modeling it through a class discussion, the students who really don't want to answer are still hearing how to do it. And they're getting that information. But you're really doing analysis and descriptive analysis more than just looking for keywords. And then you do want to have those visuals with, okay, these are the keywords that mean add, these are the keywords that mean subtraction. So the students can then go verify their operation, but talk those out before you start working on them.
That's great. I have one more question, and then what I'm going to do while you're answering it, I'm going
Yeah.
to spotlight you again. And somebody had asked if you could post your contact information again, so
Oh, yeah.
maybe you could
Hmm.
post that while you're talking. So we'll kill two birds with one stone. So this question says, what is the research on using computer-based tools such as Kami instead of having students work on paper, especially for students who struggle with dysgraphia?
Yes, so there's another topic we could do a whole webinar on for sure. And I'll say really quickly, some of the researchers I want you to go look up would be Brian Butterworth. He's kind of the grandfather of everything dyscalculia related. Steve Chin, they're both in the UK. Um, Daniel Ansari, he's in Canada. He's a psychologist. He has a lot of great research. He works a lot with Geary and Dehane. They're leading people in the United States. Michelle Mazzocco, Katie Lewis, and John Tay Myers. Those are kind of U.S. based researchers you can look at. Um, and that'll get you started on some of the research. We don't have enough, especially in the field of quantitative. So you're going to find some mixed results with computer programs or other types of interventions. There are some that show a lot of great improvement. And certainly if a student has dysgraphia, I might want them to practice, but I'm not never going to make them rely only on writing. And I would probably have those students tell me and describe how they're going to solve a problem. They would have to talk me through the long division number by number and talk me through the subtraction. And I can write down what they're saying as a transcriber. And then we can analyze if they were right or wrong. Um, that's a really great ad- accommodation. As far as an intervention, if you have a computer program that is working for your student, absolutely keep doing that. If you have a computer program and you find it's not really working for your student, stop doing that. It's going to be more individualized than a blanket statement. And I would caution you that if you're doing a really great intervention of any kind, that you then have a discussion where you tell the student how that applies to what you're testing on Friday. Because a lot of those computer programs are not on Friday's test. So the student thinks they know what they're doing, they feel like they got some traction, and they still have an F. So there's a big disconnect. They don't know why there's a disconnect, and they're still barred from higher level math. So don't just give them that intervention and think that has fixed the problem. Help bridge that to the curriculum you're using in class.
Great. I one more question popped up, and I don't know if this can be answered in 30 seconds or less. This could probably be another very large, long rather answer. What could parents do to support their kids as they hit high school and beyond?
Especially so in general, what I really want parents to do is to stop fighting with their children. I want you to play some games. I want you to watch movies together. I want you to go on some nature walks. I just want you to have a peaceful experience. They're going to be through high school and out of your house before you know it, and you just have to have that strong, positive, emotional time with them. If you really want to do something that's related to math, you could try playing some very basic card or dice games. It might be Yahtzee, it might not. It might be Go Fish. And then you're at least getting dice and cards in their hands, and your probability and statistics teachers will thank you greatly the more you do that. Um, you can play other games, and if they're really into video games, just talk to them about it and ask them to explain the game to you and make that something that you share with them so you have that connection. In high school, I really want you talking to the school and advocating for grade level work. I want you advocating that you keep trying different programs. Uh, I do have one. I'm not going to talk about it, but you can go look at it if you want. But you find the one that's working best for your child. When you're looking at that transition into college, I will tell you to go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. There are colleges and universities that are designed for students who are neurodivergent, and there are places where the student success staff and the math and science professors are on the same page. And then there are universities and colleges where they are not. So don't spend your money and your time in a place where your student is not getting the accommodations that they should have. And don't be pushed out of grade level classes.
Thank you so very much. Thank you everybody who joined. We did record this, and so this is going to be sent to everybody who is here, everybody who registered. So you'll get a recording. We're hoping to have this out by early next week. I know there were some people whose questions weren't answered. Please go ahead and you can either email me, Janine Cyrus. I was the one who emailed everybody with the Zoom link, or you can email, obviously, Dr. Wall. She had her
Mhm.
contact information there. If you email me, I'll make sure she gets the questions as well. Thank you so much for your time tonight. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time, and thanks everyone for listening.
Bye now. Have a great night.